It's a great honor to be here. This is just really an adventure to be home and doing this. I grew up in Southern California, I grew up in Long Beach, and so it's one thing to do this stuff on the East Coast, but to come back home and be among Californians is a delight to my heart. Because you have to know, on the East Coast, I have to encourage people to be casual. And that if you've got a question, feel free to ask it. And people are very formal on the East Coast. So it's good to be home to share a bit about the book. I'm always a bit puzzled about what to say, because the irony is that none of this would have happened if the Vatican had not censured the Leadership Conference of Women Religious. Now, a bunch of you are nodding your heads. So those of you who are enlightened in much of the arcana of the Catholic Church, you're in with the in crowd. But let me just summarize it briefly for those who, so nobody feels left out, because I'm all about the 100%. But our beloved church has some strange thoughts, and in 2012, April 14th, My Beloved Organization Network celebrated its 40th anniversary. We had a great party, and the question was, how do we let people know what we're doing? How do we get our mission out there? How do we let people know we've been working on Capitol Hill for 40 years to try to make better policies? And we had little baby ideas. 4 days later, the Vatican issued a censure of the leadership group of Catholic Sisters and mentioned our organization, which at the time had 9 full-time staff, as being a bad influence on Catholic sisters in the United States. It was all because of our stand on healthcare reform, I'm convinced, that we stood up for the Affordable Care Act when the bishops got bad information from their staff and opposed it. The reasons the bishops opposed it is that their staff told them that there was federal funding for abortion in the Affordable Care Act. Now, my astute political analysis is, liar, liar, pants on fire. What they did was that the bishops believed their staff, so you would, because you get staff to be trusted. What 2 federal courts have found as a matter of law is that my reading of the bill was correct, not theirs. Now, the bishops are not noted for apologies or anything like that. So they changed their website about a year ago to say not that there is federal funding of abortion in the Affordable Care Act, but they changed it to read, they fear that there's federal funding of abortion. So it's like, I just say what Jesus says in the gospel over and over is, fear not. But look at this. This is the miracle of it. This is the surprise of it. Is that, okay, we had our 40th anniversary. 4 days later comes the censure. We're listed as a bad influence. And because my organization has no direct connection with Rome, we can be free and open and talk to the media. And I kind of enjoy it too, so let's put that in too. But what happened was the leadership conference, their leadership was still in Rome, and they weren't available to answer questions, so I started talking to the press within about 20 minutes of hearing the news. And from that came this explosion of opportunity. But my prayer became, how do we use this moment for mission? How do we use this moment to lift up the needs of folks in our nation that are struggling so hard? And how do we use this moment to create an opportunity for something bigger? Because those of you that know Catholic sisters know it's never about having the spotlight on us. It's just not why we do this. So my prayer was, how do we use it for mission? And what came to me, those of you that know the Christian scriptures, there's the story of Jesus and the Samaritan woman at the well. And Jesus is not in Israel, not in Palestine. He's off in Samaria. He's in a foreign territory. Men were not supposed to talk to women. Jews were not supposed to talk to Samaritans. And what does Jesus do? He talks to the Samaritan, woman at the well. Not only does he talk to her, he asks her for help. And what that did for me, just meditating on that scripture, was that I needed to ask our lay colleagues in DC for help. How do we, because I felt like our imagination was too small to respond to this opportunity. We had an Italian newspaper have one of their reporters from New York City take the train down so they could have an Italian exclusive interview with me. It was like, what? the guy from the Argentinian press came to take me out for coffee, because in Argentina you would not just have a conversation and be interviewed. You would want to have it over coffee, do the social thing. And of course the staff was really nervous. They wondered, could we trust him? Was it all right? Anyway, it all worked out fine. But it was all this opportunity. And in the city where everyone wants to claim credit for something that works, no one remembers in that May 14th meeting who first said road trip. But by the end of an hour-and-a-half meeting, we were going on the road. We were going to push back against the Paul Ryan budget, which we've been doing for 2 years, and we were going to lift up the works of Catholic sisters. And I have to tell you, it was like magic, electricity, lightning. It was just amazing, because it was the opportunity to lift up real people in our nation and push back against a rhetoric that is undermining all of us, and to stand up for the 100%. There's this book called Spirit Level. It's probably someplace here in Vroman. It's fabulous. But what it does is it's these economists who have done the research that indicates where there is greater income and wealth disparity, there's a lower quality of life for the 100%. Everybody suffers. And so what we did was to say, we got to pull this in, we got to rein it in for the 100%, for all of us. So being on the bus is like magic. And so then came this opportunity to write this book and try to share the story about what matters. Where are we going as a nation? What is the fear that has driven us apart? And how can we come together? And what I've come to realize going around the country is that people are so hungry. And so I wanted to read this one piece. It's kind of weird to read your own writing. Anyway, I just want to tell you that. So, but this is just a little bit that talks about the difference of what we found on the trip, on that first trip. It goes like this. When we started the trip, I assumed that the evening friend-raisers, notice it wasn't fundraisers, it was friend-raisers, would be the time when we would be renewed and stirred up, where we would swap stories and people would laugh at my jokes and life would be fine. And I expected that the places where we would be challenged would be in the visits to the places where the sisters worked, because that was where the low-income folks were struggling and suffering. But what I discovered was the opposite. The places where the sisters worked were places that created relationships, beauty, a sense of community. There was a solidarity and mission and connection. Take our press conference in Philadelphia, for example, at the Mercy Neighborhood Ministries. We always trust people on the ground to recommend whoever they want to speak at the media event. And they told us we should have little Mikhail, a 7-year-old boy from a low-income neighborhood there. I wasn't quite sure he was ready to handle all the press in the room. He was several inches shorter than the podium, but I handed him the microphone, and he walked around in front and said, "I'm Mikhail. I'm a second grader, and I am a shining star." He explained that he had been taught that we are all called to be bright lights to guide each other on our journeys. "So I'm a brilliant star," he finished. It was fabulous. But that's the kind of work that gets done in those ministries. Folks are struggling, but people are helping, and they are all in it together. It is the unseen struggle that so many others face. Those were the stories that emerged in the evening friend-raisers. The loneliness, the fear, and the spiritual hunger were huge, huge. So often I'd come away from friend-raisers and I would just want to weep for all of these people trying so hard and still finding themselves so empty. It was at a friend-raiser in Cincinnati, for example, where I met Jeannie and Lynn, Margaret Kistler's sister and her partner, who had come from Madison, where they lived, to a memorial service for Margaret. Margaret had lost her life because a few years earlier she lost her job when the recession hit. And when she lost, I can't do two things at once. And when that happened, she lost her health care. And because she didn't have any way to get cancer screening, she ended up dying of colon cancer at the age of 56. Margaret had suspected for 2 years before her diagnosis that something was wrong, but she couldn't afford to go to the doctor. A trip to the emergency room after a life-threatening episode finally confirmed the diagnosis of cancer, and then it was too late for treatment to help. The disease had spread throughout her body. So these beautiful women came from Margaret's memorial service, which was held earlier that afternoon, and they brought me her picture. Of course, I cry at everything, and this was too much. I just wrapped them around, hugged them, and we cried. And they said yes, I could tell Margaret's story, because if healthcare reform law is fully implemented, with the full expansion of Medicaid in all the states, with many Republican governors are still resisting, then no more Margarets need die this way. It is a pro-life thing to do, for God's sake. But this is Margaret, and this is what, so it's Margaret's story that has fueled my commitment to making sure that Medicaid gets expanded. California's doing a good job implementing the Affordable Care Act. There are much good news. What you have to remember, though, is that the Affordable Care Act was never supposed to be the final bill. It was supposed to be conferenced. It was all these political complications. So every time I speak in Massachusetts, I tell them it's Massachusetts' fault that the Affordable Care Act was the best we could do. Because Massachusetts voted for Scott Brown as a Republican to take Kennedy's seat, and then politics being politics, nothing else was going to get through. So the House of Representatives, the only way forward was to pass the Affordable Care Act. The Affordable Care Act is good enough to keep Margarets from dying. That is the truth of the Affordable Care Act. And it's got problems. We can make it better. We will be working on it. It's a full employment program for lobbyists eventually. We'll all be able to improve it. And it's a huge step forward. It's a huge step forward. So what happened because of Margaret is that I carry all these people now in my Bible that I travel with. So what I am keenly aware of is that the stories of real people are what are going to make a difference. It's and Pope Francis, I'm feeling affectionate towards him. I think other people are too, so I'm calling him Frank. I don't think he's mind. Pope Frank. I mean, don't you think that has a nice ring to it? It's kind of endearing. I don't think he minds. But Pope Frank says in his exhortation that one of the ways to build peace is by using reality, not theories. Reality, not theories. And a week and a half ago, I got to meet with Paul Ryan again. Everybody knows Paul Ryan, chair of the budget committee. Okay, I met with him once after the bus trip. That story. And then last summer, I got to testify in front of him in the House Budget Committee. I was the one Democratic witness, and they had 3 Republican witnesses. But this is my view of the Holy Spirit on that, is that a whole bunch of Republicans are Catholics. And so several of them said they had always wanted to ask a nun a question. So because they wanted to do that, I had way more airtime than the Minority Witness usually gets. It was really great. So, I don't know, the Holy Spirit, in my view, works in all of this for kind of fun, making mischief. But what happened was a week and a half ago, it'll be 2 weeks ago tomorrow, I got to meet with Paul Ryan again to hear what he's learning about the issue of poverty, because he's beginning to explore poverty, which is really important that our nation wake up to it. Now I see some people with faces that say, oh my glory, maybe we ought to just keep him away from the topic. Here's the challenge. Unless we come together as a nation around these critical topics and we risk something new, we're never going to be able to really change the direction that we're headed. And that's what we need. So I got to meet with Paul Ryan. It was very interesting. I brought him a book. I gave him a copy of my book. I inscribed it to him. It was really nice. I handed it to him and he says, "Oh, am I in there?" I said, "Oh yes, there's a whole chapter devoted to me." Kind of curious. But then we talked about it. But what happened was very quickly, we went from his, he told me that talking about poverty had made a bunch of Democrats angry because Republicans aren't supposed to talk about poverty. I said, no, but we all need to talk about it. He agreed with that. But his answer very quickly went to free market analysis and away from the story of real people. And so I tried to tell him the story of real people, like the entrepreneur Jason that I met a couple months ago down in San Diego. And Jason is one of those 35-year-old entrepreneurial geniuses. He's created 3 companies. He was selling them. He was about to be a dad for the first time. He was all excited. And he said, you know, I've done pretty well, but I pay all my people living wages. I pay a living wage. But I'm getting upset. I go, really? Why? And he said, I'm getting upset because my taxes are going to fund my competitors. My competitors are paying low wages, and their employees are going to use the safety net. You know, food stamps, Medi-Cal, those kinds of things. So they can have fed employees with low wages, and my taxes are subsidizing my competitors. That's making me mad. We should all pay a living wage. So I told Paul Ryan that, and he said, well, are you for a mandated wage? And I go, yeah, I am. Oh, that's against the free market. And I tried to talk to him about how the free market was not working for Jason. And it wasn't working for Robin, who works full-time in a clothing store, a national chain, profitable clothing store. And I met her at the White House. Can you believe I get these opportunities? Oh yes, we were at the White House waiting for President Obama to come to the State Dining Room to sign the executive order to raise the minimum wage for federal contract workers. And Robin is this woman in her probably mid to late 20s. She had this gorgeous sapphire blue dress. She was so excited to be there. She could hardly stand it. She took a picture, it was her phone, she took a picture of her chair, and she took a picture of the place where President Obama was going to be, and then she had to pick me, take a picture of her in her chair. It was great. She was so excited. And after we talked for a while, she told me that she made minimum wage. And she was really excited because some of her friends were going to get, because they worked in for federal contractors, were going to get a raise. It was really good, and she hoped eventually a raise would come to her. And after we talked for a bit more, she says to me, you know, I got this dress, because I was admiring your dress, I got this dress on sale at my clothing store with my employee discount, and it was on sale. It cost $20.43. Isn't it great? And it was beautiful. And then she looked me in the eye and she said, you know, by looking at me, you would never know that I have to live in a homeless shelter because I can't afford rent. I thought, whoa, this isn't working for anybody. This isn't working for Jason. This isn't working for Robin. This isn't working for us. We've got to make it change. It will require us paying a little bit more, maybe. Perhaps some CEOs, did you see the CEO's salary for the first time has gone over $10 million? Do you know, I have a friend who figured out that a CEO, that's $5,000 an hour. And at $5,000 an hour, in 3 hours, you make what a person on minimum wage working full-time makes in a year. That's wrong. That's wrong. We, the people, are better than this. And so that brings me to the end, which is the last part of the book. And then we'll open it up for conversation and questions and stuff. But the end of this is, we're better than this. And the fact is, we're losing our democracy. Because what's happening is we're afraid for ourselves. We're afraid for ourselves, so we have this pull up the drawbridge mentality when democracy requires that we be community and in this together. It is an unpatriotic lie started by our California export, Ronald Reagan, that our nation is based in individualism. When in the Wild West did you ever have a barn raising and you did it by yourself? Have you ever had a quilting bee and just one person showed up? Ever have a wagon train with just one wagon? The fact is we're based in community. But manipulated fear has driven us apart for the benefit of the few and the detriment of the many. We, the people, are better than this. So, I've got this theory. I'll have a theory for everything, but my theory is this. We spent the last half of the 20th century working hard on civil rights, which we had to do. We still have a lot of work to do on that issue. But what happened with civil rights is like, if I got my right, then maybe there wasn't enough to go around. I had to hold on to my rights because I wasn't sure you should have yours. And so we had all that fighting about civil rights. But there's another side to this. And this is what I posit at the end, is what we've got is civil obligations. Yeah, I've got a right to vote, but I have an obligation to vote. I have a right to be involved, but I have an obligation to be involved. We, the people of the United States, have an obligation to work on this together if our experiment of democracy is going to work. And so, we, the people of the United States, we need to stand up. We need to stand up against big money. We need to stand up and speak our truth. We need to make sure there is room for everyone. We need to talk to the Paul Ryans of the world. We need to talk to the John Boehners if you can. Get to them. I can't get to them, but I keep trying. We need to reach out to everyone. Because we, the people, together will know the best way forward. No one of us has a corner on wisdom and insight. But what we do know is this is intolerable, and we have to reclaim community to build the future. Thank you. Let's open it up for a little conversation, because this is always my favorite part, because this is when I learn stuff. Yes?
Bill Maher on HBO.
Thank you.
And I was so thrilled with your visit there. And what I really loved was Bill Maher. He was quiet. He let you talk.
he was nervous. He was nervous. It was really interesting.
I also want to mention, as a Democrat, I was so thrilled with the last Democratic convention in 2012, and I saw you speak, and I saw, it was an amazing event that whole week to see you speak, and the way that you brought everyone to their feet, and how you impacted everyone was wonderful.
Thank you.
And I hope that you get an opportunity to work with Senator Warren from Massachusetts, because she's also a person who's very passionate.
Absolutely.
She wants to do things right for all of us, the whole country.
Yeah.
And I hope you have an opportunity to work with her.
Great.
And make things more.
Well, let me give you some news about Senator Warren, because I did get to meet with her about 2.5 weeks ago, and we've got a project. Not only do we do Nuns on the Bus, we do a bunch of issues around taxes. We, the taxpayer, we did a Taxpayer Pride Day, where we encourage people to send in selfies, where you take a picture of yourself with a camera, with whatever your favorite government service was, because we want people to change this language. Taxes are how we invest in our society, for God's sakes. So I almost got run over because I was standing out in the bike lane to take a picture of me at the bike lane, because I ride a bike in DC, and so. We got to meet with her and tell her about that and give her our DVD on We the Taxpayer. It's 6 sessions. What we're trying to do is to get faith communities talking about the faithful responsibility to pay taxes. It's the faithful way forward. And how we invest our taxes is for our future. And when you think of what our parents and grandparents did in creating the highway system, the school system, the education system, all of this opportunity And what are we doing? We're sucking every dime out for ourselves? I mean, that's just wrong. You know, the last part of the preamble to the Constitution, we the people, says for us, that's where we stop. But it's for us and our posterity. We have an obligation to invest for future generations, which is going to continue. So anyway, Senator Warren took the video home and was going to watch it that night. I haven't heard back yet what she thought. But she also has a really new bill that's coming up to refinance, to let students refinance their student debt. Do you know $45 billion of student debt are held by people over 60?
What?
Because a bunch of folks lost jobs when they were in their 50s and went back to school to get retrained, which is the way it's educated to go forward, or trying to help grandkids, kids and grandkids. They co-sign loans. And so not only is it crippling the students, it's crippling folks approaching retirement. And that there's got to be a better way forward. The other piece that I hadn't realized till I started speaking a lot at colleges and universities is that the debt, student debt, is also crippling creativity. Because kids can't just start something new. When I left law school, I started my own law practice. Just because I saw a need and I went and did it. If I had had a whole bunch of student debt, I would have had to get a fancy paying job to pay it back. So we need our creative young people to make a difference. Thank you. Good points. Questions, other stuff you're curious about? Yeah?
I have a question for you. It's a historical question.
Oh, it might be historical.
Martin Luther King Jr. From your perspective, why was he a lifelong registered Republican? A lot of people don't know that, but there's got to be some basis in that coming out of his era and things.
Why was Dr. King a lifelong registered Republican?
Yes.
I have no idea. I mean, I don't know. It's interesting because at the time that it can be. Do you want to respond?
Yeah, actually it had to do with African Americans wanting to follow Abraham Lincoln. They knew he was a Republican. So until the 60s and the...
Okay, so the story from the front up here is that it has to do with the loyalty to Abraham Lincoln, a Republican.
Exactly.
And staying with the one who emancipated.
So it wasn't until
Democrats were tied to the southern states.
The
pro-slavery states.
Pro-slavery. But do you know what we found on the bus last year? I grew up in Southern California, and the civil rights mattered a lot to me and my sister, but I had never traveled in the South, and I discovered when I moved to DC, one of the early things that I did there was to be on a panel at George Washington University, and we did our presentations, and then this very lovely, fine white man asked me a question. He was the first one to ask a question, and I found inside myself anger rise up. And I realized I had a serious prejudice against white men who speak with Southern accent. Because the only ones I'd ever seen were racists like Bull Connor, or, you know, who was a Faubus, or all of these folks. And I had never known my prejudice. I tripped over. I had to ask the guy to repeat his question because I was trying to contain my anger. I just wanted to slap him, you know, in such a non-violent, ever thoughtful way. But what I realized was that what I learned on the bus last summer was like in Alabama is still operating under the state constitution from Reconstruction. And every time they want to change the law, they have to change their constitution. And they have to get it screened by the Department of Justice. And so that they don't perpetuate their prejudice and their, you know, Jim Crow and all this other stuff. But every time they want to change the law, they fight the Civil War again. It is current events for them. It is not history. Some way, we have got to find a way as a nation for all of us to be able to move forward together. Because for them, it's still alive.